Malia Woods was born 15 April 2008 in Florida. Her mother was Christian Woods. Her father was Everett Weathers. She was living with her mother and her two siblings. She had a twin sister. The twin sister's name is Myleahya. She had a brother. His name was Jiterius. Her father did not live in the house. Now on Monday, October 12, 2009, Christian had gone to Alabama for the weekend. She left the two girls and the brother home alone. Remember, the two girls were 2 years old. Christian left 6 containers of Jell-O for the children to eat. There was no water or electricity in the house. The brother himself was found in the house alone and police were called. He was found by his grandfather. When police arrived in the home, there was no adult supervision. At the time, Jiterius, the brother, was found to be emaciated, looking to be dirty, to smell of urine, and to have various wounds on his body. There was a mark on his forehead and an abrasion on his right cheek. A child protective investigator then went to the hospital with the brother. A physician told the CPI that the brother had a hematoma and was extremely dirty. The physician said the child was not gaining weight. See, previously in June, he weighed 22 pounds. The blood work also showed his potassium and sodium counts were low. He was described as very skinny. In the same room was the grandparents of the children. They told the CPI they hadn't seen the children in a while. The grandmother had lived with the mother and children from November 08 until June 09. During that time, the mother, Christian, worked a lot and her ex-boyfriend took care of the children. And in more recent times prior to this incident, Christian lost her job a month before. And that past weekend, the grandmother said she loaned Christian her car. This is because Christian's own personal car had been repossessed. Wowzers. Police then spoke with one of the aunts of the children. She said she last talked to her sister Christian a month before. At that time, the children did appear to be losing weight. She did have suspicions that something was wrong, but every time she asked Christian about the children, Christian said she was going to take them to the doctor, put them in daycare, but she never did. And remember, at this point in the story, only the boy is in hospital. Nobody knows where the two girls are right now. And by the way, after this, I've got the insane, crazy story of Tiffany Powell, who had basically 15 kids. So stay tuned for that one. So then later the next day, Sheriff's Office investigators called the CPI and said, "We found the twin girls. Myleahya was in the trash can. She was dead. The other child was rushed to the hospital. She was still alive. The one that was alive, she was found stuck under some debris. It seemed she was hiding from something and got stuck." The CPI then went to the hospital to see the sister and noted she had a completely flat effect. She only weighed 13 pounds and did not even register on the height weight chart. There was some muscle wasting on her face and it looked like she had been lying flat on her back for an extended period of time. Her clothing was dingy, filthy and urine soaked. Her diaper was completely full of urine and watery feces. She was wrapped in blankets because she was suffering from hypothermia. Her ribs and joints were visible and protruding underneath her skin. She had so little body fat that when lying on her stomach, her was visible between her back legs. What the f? The CPI again then spoke with the grandmother to figure out how could any of this happen. The grandmother said she suffered from depression and took Zoloft to manage it. She had no knowledge of Christian having a drug history. The grandmother told the police that the children's father, Everett Weathers, had just gotten out of jail a couple of months ago. He had a history of using drugs. His last contact with the family was before the twins were born. The grandmother said Christian hadn't been taking care of the children. She has not been feeding them and had been leaving them home alone a lot. So then the CPI contacted the medical examiner's office. She was told that law enforcement found Myleahya in a garbage can just outside the house. She was covered in a sheet. It appeared she had been dead for around 2 days. There was skin slippage and worms on her body. In one of the bedrooms, there was a tent for a marijuana grow operation, and there were cockroaches everywhere. But the CPI was wondering, hold on a minute, how did the child end up in a trash can? That is a deliberate act. So the CPI called Christian's ex-boyfriend. He said Christian called him the previous day and said Myleahya was gone. She told him that somebody named Tiffany had the child a few days prior. The ex-boyfriend told the CPI he did have concerns about Christian never taking the children to doctor's appointments. Christian told him she had a restraining order against the children's father, Everett. So the CPI then went to the house again, where all of this took place. The The home was described as being in disarray and hazardous. Mattresses had no linens on them. There were minimal toys and clothes. The power was off, but there was running water. The fridge, however, was full of food. There were half-eaten cups of jello on the living room floor. There were no baby items except an open box of dried-up baby wipes. A small blanket on the living room floor was urine soaked. And again, we're all wondering, okay, what happened? Christian, what were you doing? So, at this point, police interviewed her. I have requested that interview footage, so I'll let you know if I get it. Christian told police the kids were doing fine until her breakup with her ex-boyfriend. See, they had planned to get married so that she wouldn't lose custody of the children because she had planned to go to the army. However, her ex-boyfriend did not want her to go. After he left her, she admitted she started leaving the children home alone while she worked during the day. She said she would change their diapers, give them food, and come home to check on them during her break. So, on October the 10th, she left home around 9 a.m. When she left, all 3 children were on the bed in the master bedroom. She did not return home until the following Monday morning. You know that image? It breaks my soul. She left these kids home alone all weekend. I mean, think of the consequences. Separation anxiety, hunger, fear. I have no idea if the 2 girls could even walk. What a silly cow. Where the fuck did you go? You know what she told police? She thought other people would have gone by the home because she was allowing friends to use her room to grow marijuana. They were always in and out. So she thought, well, one of them's going to attend to them. It's no big deal. Moron. She told police she left the children a full bag of Cheerios. The water and the power were on when she left for the weekend. Now, when she returned on Monday morning, Jitterius, the brother, was sitting on the couch, and Myleahya, the sister that survived, was lying on the bed. She fed them both cranberry juice and pudding. Then she went to check on Myleahya and realized she was gone. Myleahya had passed away. She wrapped her in a blue and white blanket. Now, she said, I did not put her in the trash can, but it's pretty obvious she did. She told police, however, one of the friends, the marijuana growers if you like, they must have put her in the trash can. She went on to say that the children's father had never done anything for them. He denied that they were his twins to begin with until a DNA test was confirmed. She said she was afraid to take the children to the doctor. When the brother was around 2 months old, he wasn't eating his formula, so she took him to the doctor. He had lost 2 ounces and the DCF was called on her. She was afraid if she took the twins to the doctor, the DCF would take the children from her. She realized she could have called her father for help at any time, but she didn't. She described herself as generally having the potential to be a good mother. No, not when you piss off for 2 days or the whole weekend or however long it was. She admitted she was depressed and overwhelmed trying to deal with the breakup and care for 3 children. So then police decided, well, let's interview other family members. So they interviewed the paternal grandmother. She said she had last seen the children at a birthday party in August. The paternal relatives didn't see the children often. The grandmother felt Christian was trying to use the children to punish the father. If he did not do what the mother wanted him to do, she wouldn't let him see the children. Now, to give you a further indication on how Christian treated her children, you see when the brother was 31 months old, he was noted to have electrolyte imbalance, developmental delay and malnutrition. His potassium level was very low and it required immediate treatment. There was documented concern about his weight. He was described as failure to thrive and there was concern that he was not getting enough to eat. On one occasion, he was seen at the emergency department for a head injury. There were allegations the mother had been running from the father. She was holding the baby, fell on the concrete and it injured his head. Furthermore, regarding the sister, Myleahya, the one that survived, when she was 17 months, she had been admitted to the hospital with severe dehydration, malnourishment and electrolyte abnormalities, including hypernatremia, hypokalemia and hypovolemic shock. The children were treated so badly that there are words I never even heard of to describe them. According to the medical records, she was born 2 months premature at 35 weeks gestation with a birth weight of 5 pounds. A medical report at the time stated at her age, she should have been fully mobile and able to walk, crawl and sit without support. Her vocabulary should have consisted of at least 4 to 20 words. She should have been able to drink from a cup. However, she was non-verbal and couldn't do any of those things. The medical report suggested the child was in grave danger of death if ever allowed to be back in the care of her mother. Now, regarding this incident, the 2 surviving siblings were removed from the home and placed in shelter care. A dependency petition was filed on the two children. The court reunified the children with the father against the recommendation of the Children's Department. Christian's parental rights of the children were terminated on March 2010. And to conclude on this case, Christian, who was 23 at the time, received a 15-year prison sentence and 30 years probation. She was charged with aggravated manslaughter. And you know what? In 2022, she was released. She starved the children, neglected them, then went on a party for a weekend and came back. That is sickening. 15 years. I've slept longer than 15 years. Now I've got the case of Tiffany Powell. She was born in 1981 and lived in Akron, Ohio. She herself had 8 children. In 2013, her boyfriend at the time was James Harris. James was around 60 years old. He was a former Marine and retired special education teacher with the Akron School District. He himself was the father of 10 children. 5 of those were with Tiffany. He spent his retirement restoring and selling used cars. Now, let's do the math quickly. She has 8 kids herself. James had 5 more himself that were not Tiffany's. So that's 13 children between them. I don't even have 13 friends. And their relationship was far from perfect. Tiffany visited many domestic violence shelters and she claimed she was afraid of James. The relationship was seemingly unrepairable. Now, Jabari Harris, who is James' adult son from a previous marriage, he testified he had known Tiffany for around 10 years. She and his father used to date each other. Jabari testified that his father and Tiffany had 5 children together. All of them were daughters ranging from 4 to 13 years of age at the time of his crime. Jabari told police that Tiffany and his father ended their relationship about a year or 2 before this incident. He also testified that his father was a retired school teacher. His father had a hobby of buying old cars, fixing them, and reselling them. So in 2013, Beverly Donald, who was an attorney with a family law practice, she and James Harris retained her services. He wanted her help to obtain legal custody of the 5 minor children that he shared with Tiffany. Beverly testified that on August 23, 2013, she filed on his behalf an emergency ex parte motion for temporary custody, along with a complaint for legal custody of his 5 children. She further testified that a judge granted the emergency ex parte motion, thereby granting him temporary custody of his 5 children. And according to Beverly, there was a trial date to determine the outcome, as of course, this was temporary. However, the trial did not proceed. You see, Rosita Kelly was a friend of Tiffany. She testified Tiffany offered to pay her $100 if she helped in a plot to lure James to a house under false pretenses. Kelly stated Tiffany told her the purpose of the plot was to entrap James Harris into violating a civil protection order, which Tiffany said would help her regain custody of her 5 children. Ooh, quite the devious plot, madam. Kelly testified that upon agreeing to help Tiffany with her plot, she texted her, "Yay, I'm getting my babies back. I mean, with your help, of course, thanks." Kelly then testified about how the plot developed on the day in question. On April 26, 2014, Tiffany and her boyfriend at the time, his name was Paul Reed, picked her up in a van around 4 p.m. They then all drove over to Mr. Harris's garage so that she could make her initial contact with him. Kelly testified that Reed parked the van down the street from James Harris's garage so that it could not be seen. Kelly then exited the van and approached the garage while Reed and Tiffany stayed in the van. Kelly testified that Mr. Harris was not at his garage, but that she spoke with one of his friends. Kelly told the friend about a car she wanted to sell Mr. Harris, and the friend provided her with Mr. Harris's cell phone number. She then returned to the van and she, Reed and Tiffany drove around while she tried calling Mr. Harris on a brand new track phone that Tiffany had provided for her. She eventually got in touch with Mr. Harris and had a 1 to 2 minute conversation with him. She told Mr. Harris that she had a car and a washing machine that she wanted to sell him. While she was speaking with Mr. Harris on the phone, Reed and Tiffany were both providing her with information to relay to Mr. Harris about the car that was allegedly for sale. Because of course, they're just trying to lure him to the house. Mr. Harris arranged to meet Kelly later that evening at the Minota Avenue residence, which Kelly said was her residence pursuant to Tiffany's instructions. So Kelly, Reed, and Tiffany went to that house. They parked around the corner so that the van could not be seen near the house. They waited in the garage for Mr. Harris to arrive. Jabari, the son of James, testified that his father called him around 8 p.m. and asked him to go with him in order to check out a car that was for sale. Jabari agreed and his father picked him up. Upon arriving at the residence, a woman was standing in the driveway. This woman, who he did not know, indicated that they could not enter the house through the front door because the carpet had recently been cleaned. Jabari stated that his father then grabbed a flashlight and exited the van. He walked around the back of the house with this woman and Jabari waited in the van. This was the last time Jabari saw his father alive. He further testified that after waiting for a period of time in the van, he walked to the back of the house. There were no lights and it was a completely dark behind the house. He called out for his father but no reply. At this point, his suspicion was growing and that he became concerned. He then walked back to his father's van, at which time police officers began arriving at the scene. The police informed Jabari that they were responding to a reported disturbance. He eventually saw Tiffany and Reed exit the house and that he was shocked and astounded to see Tiffany there. So, what happened? How did the police get there so quickly? Well, Kelly testified that while she, Reed and Tiffany were all waiting for Mr. Harris to arrive, James called the track phone to inform her that he was on his way. Kelly said that Reed then peered out of a mail slot in the garage to keep an eye out for Mr. Harris. She stated that Mr. Harris called her to say, "Look, I'm on Minota Avenue, but I can't find the house." Kelly stated that she then went outside to meet Mr. Harris while Reed and Tiffany waited in the garage. And this is where she told him, "We can't go in through the front door because the carpets were not cleaned." This was a lie. This is what Tiffany told her to tell him to get him to go to the back of the house, which led directly to the basement where the other two were waiting. Now, Sergeant Don Ross of the Akron Police Department testified that the carpet inside the house was dry during the investigation in the immediate wake of James Harris's death. Kelly stated that she then led James to the back of the house to a door that led to the basement. She led Harris down the stairs into the basement, at which time Reed immediately struck Mr. Harris in the head with a pole. Mr. Harris was not carrying a weapon, and that he neither said anything nor made any movements towards Reed prior to Reed striking him. Kelly stated that upon seeing Reed hit Mr. Harris with the pole, she immediately ran up the stairs, ran outside and hid in the neighbor's yard. She also dropped the track phone in the neighbor's yard, where it was later recovered by law enforcement. Kelly further testified that she observed the lights in the basement turn off just before police arrived on the scene. And when police officers arrived at the residence, officers Jason McKeel and Nathaniel Milstead of the Akron Police Department testified that they called for paramedics upon entering the house and seeing James Harris' unconscious body on the basement floor. Milstead testified that he checked Mr. Harris's pulse upon his arrival, but he could not find it. He did find a gun next to his body. Mr. Harris was pronounced dead at the scene. Now, Lisa Kohler, the medical examiner, performed the autopsy. She concluded the cause of Mr. Harris's death was blunt force trauma to the head and that the manner of death was homicide. She testified she counted at least 15 separate points of impact to his head, but could not definitively state how many Mr. Harris endured because the bruises on his head and face pulled up and came together. She could not determine which particular strike proved to be lethal, but noted that Mr. Harris's head was possibly slammed into the basement's concrete floor. The doctor also testified that his brain was swollen and that bleeding was present around the outside of his brain. She further stated that Mr. Harris had bruising on his thigh, left arm, lower back, upper back, near the shoulder blade and the base of his neck. She also stated that the victim had many contusions and abrasions on his face and forehead. Finally, the doctor testified that upon examining his hands, it appeared that Mr. Harris had no defensive wounds and that there was no evidence that he fought anybody immediately prior to his death. Now, Officer Guy Sheffield of the Akron Police Department, he examined the cell phones between Tiffany, Kelly and James, as well as the track phone as part of the investigation. He found that the phone records of all the cell phones, including text messages, applications and Facebook messages, they showed that Tiffany crafted a plan to have Kelly lure Mr. Harris to the Minota Avenue in the guise of selling him a car. According to the officer, the track phone made 11 outgoing calls to Mr. Harris's cell phone and had 3 incoming calls from Mr. Harris's cell phone on the day in question. Moreover, Tiffany's phone herself made several calls going to Mr. Harris's cell phone, but those calls were made using the *67 privacy blocker function. Tiffany also installed 9 applications on her cell phone, including voice changes, phone number hiders, and fake caller IDs. Now, she did delete many messages from her phone, but the messages from the track phone were still there. Kelly's cell phone also had all the messages. And it was determined from the cell phone records that it was Tiffany herself who called 911 approximately around 10:15 to summon law enforcement to the scene. So she's the one that called the police. I wonder why. Now, during the trial, Reed testified that he said he met Tiffany 4 years before when she was living in her car with her 7 children. That makes no sense. How do you live in a car with 7 children? I mean, did her car even have 7 seats? He said he invited her and the children to live with him. Now, Reed said James Harris was upset about the relationship between Reed and Tiffany. So in the summer of 2013, he kicked in his truck, pulled Reed out of it, and assaulted him with a curl bar. Reed said he reported the incident to police. He and Tiffany moved several times, and James would come around and start trouble. The couple eventually moved to a home on Minota Avenue in April of 2014. And on the day of James' death, Reed said he learned about a plan concocted by Tiffany and a woman she had met in a domestic violence shelter, that woman being Kelly. The woman whom Tiffany paid $100 would call James, known for buying and fixing vehicles and other items. She called him about buying a car from her and to get him to come to Tiffany and Reed's home. When James arrived, Tiffany would call the police and report him for violating a protection order that she didn't realize was no longer active. They also expected James to leave the children at home during his trip to Akron, which could land him in trouble. Reed said James was only supposed to go into the garage to see the car and not come into the house. Instead, James came into the basement of the house holding a gun. Reed said he and James began to scuffle with his focus on getting the weapon from him. He punched James and slammed his face into the concrete basement floor several times. He stopped when the gun fell out of James's hand. By that point, James wasn't moving and Tiffany called the police. Now, the prosecutor asked if Reed or Tiffany ever planned to hurt or kill James. Reed said no, they did not. The prosecutor questioned Reed at length about the assault, asking if he pushed or banged James' head onto the floor. The prosecutor said he slammed his head into the ground again, so much that he pulled his hair out. But of course, Reed denied this was his intention. The prosecutor showed Reed and the jurors a photograph from the crime scene in which clumps of hair were visible around James. Reed admitted during his testimony that he did lie to detectives when they questioned him about James' death, including not telling them about the involvement of Tiffany's friend. At which point, Tiffany also admitted to lying to detectives. She detailed her crazy on and off relationship with James, and that included several domestic violence charges against him, and her trips to domestic violence shelters and custody disputes. But despite that, she said she still cared for James and did not want to see him harmed. She said she wanted to get back her kids. So, to conclude, a jury found Tiffany guilty of aggravated murder and obstructing justice. Paul Reed was also found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Tiffany had an odd request for her sentencing for the murder of her boyfriend. She didn't want to be there. Tiffany sent attorneys and the judge scrambling to see whether she could be sentenced without being present. But of course, this was rejected. Tiffany had to be there. And rather than standing, as a defendant normally does, and shielding her face, Tiffany at the time, who was 34, was sentenced to life in prison. She said, "I would never want my children to look at their mom and say you killed dad. No, it was your boyfriend, you moron." Tiffany said, "I had to do something. It was an emergency. I never would have risked to kill anyone in terms of getting custody back." What a doo-doo dum-dum. What a dumbass stupid plot. I mean, in regards to the first story of Christian Woods, just a silly cow who should be back in jail. But this case, Tiffany Powell, this is even dumber. What kind of stupid plot was that? Anyway, comment, tell me what you think. This story is quite controversial. This is the case of Katrina Effert. This case might be quite divisive. She was accused as the killer for strangling to death her newborn son, Rodney. She, in the summer of 2004, 19 years old, first told friends she was pregnant. That summer had been endless parade of wakeboarding, beer drinking, karaoke, cars, and parties for Katrina. Everyone in Katrina's gang was just out of high school, working low-wage jobs, charging into the world of adult pleasures and cares. One day, late in the summer, Katrina sought out her friend Vanessa at a house party. Katrina asked Vanessa if she wanted to go outside for a smoke. The two sat down on the curb. Katrina said, "I have to talk to you. I found out I'm pregnant." Katrina told a few others of her predicament, including her friend's boyfriend. She mentioned to him that a guy named Dan from Red Deer was the father. The two had sex once, but he used a condom, and that was the last he saw of Katrina. 9 months later, in April 2005, the police knocked on his apartment to tell him Katrina was linking him to the murder of a newborn. You see, Katrina had dreamed of having a house, a husband, and a baby, but her pregnancy didn't fit into the picture. Still, she would not have an abortion. She felt that would be wrong and was scared of getting one. She decided she would keep the baby but tell no one about it. When she felt the baby was about to be born, she would go to the hospital, give birth, and then give up the baby. No one would have to find out. She wouldn't have to tell her parents. So she began to wear loose and baggy clothes. She successfully hid her pregnancy from almost everyone, but not from her mother, Marlene. At the time, Katrina still lived at home with her parents in a bungalow behind a commercial street. Marlene ran a hair salon, while Katrina's father, his name was Kim, worked as a laborer at a home hardware distribution center. Now in December 2004, 3 months after Katrina had told a few friends of her pregnancy, Marlene heard a rumor that her daughter was pregnant. Marlene thought it was a case of mistaken identity because her son's fiancée was pregnant. Still, Marlene decided to confront her daughter. She had been pestering her for a year to go on birth control, but Katrina denied she was having sex. Cheeky minx. However, Katrina looked to Marlene as if she had put on a few pounds. Maybe she was putting on weight because she wasn't exercising, Marlene thought. Katrina denied to her mother that she was pregnant. Katrina feared her mother would push her to get an abortion. At times, she overheard her parents arguing about the issue, with Marlene telling her husband she thought Katrina was pregnant. Her father didn't believe it. Katrina and her father had always been close and would confide in each other. He taught her to drive, and they often worked together fixing cars, including Katrina's minivan. Marlene, however, did not let go of the issue. In February 2005, 6 months into Katrina's pregnancy, she again confronted her daughter to no avail. That winter, Katrina continued to smoke and kept going out to bars. She would usually have a few drinks at local bars. So, on Thursday, April the 14th, 2005, Katrina gave birth to the child in her basement. A few hours later, she killed the child. Katrina called in sick to Boston Pizza, saying she had the flu. She dumped the baby over her fence into a sheltered spot behind a shed in her neighbor's yard. Her thong underwear was wrapped 5 times in a tight ligature around the baby's neck. There was no knot. She carried on with her life seemingly as usual. On Saturday, April 16th, she and her father spent the day working on a Toyota in the backyard. She went to her brother's house that night and played cards until 4 a.m. The next day, she went shopping with her mum at Canadian Tire. Later, she visited her sister-in-law and her aunt, then spent the evening watching a movie with her mum. Now the baby was discovered on April the 18th at 8 a.m. by the neighbor. His thoughts went to the girls next door, Katrina and her sister-in-law. He thought they both looked pregnant. What is going on? So a team of 17 officers started working on the case, one that would see them interview 200 women as the baby's possible mother. Just after noon on April 18, 4 days after the homicide, Officer Beth Phillip knocked on Katrina's door, pulled out a tape recorder, and interviewed Katrina. Katrina said she didn't see anything or heard anything suspicious. The question may seem a little personal, the officer said, but were you at any time prior to today pregnant? Katrina said, no, I haven't had sex. You lying rat. The officer asked Katrina if anyone around had been pregnant. Katrina mentioned she had suspicions about a young neighborhood girl. This was the first time, but not the last time, she would cast suspicion on others. After police left, Marlene confronted her daughter and asked if the baby was her child. Katrina denied it, but was upset by her mother's doubts. As her sister-in-law would later testify, she was really mad that her mom would ask her. On April the 25th, 11 days after the homicide, Katrina was asked to come into the police office. She met with Judy McDonald, who was a veteran officer. During their lengthy talk, Katrina came across as chatty and cooperative with nothing to hide. Katrina told McDonald about past boyfriends, how she had 2 high school boyfriends who cheated on her. She had also dated a guy named Dan from Red Deer. She couldn't remember his last name. She told McDonald that it had some kind of crazy spelling like ASGQ or something. She said they had met in June 2004 and they last hung out at her family reunion in August 2004. Though she had had boyfriends, she was still a virgin. Well, that's what she told the officer anyway. She planned to have sex maybe once she was engaged and wanted kids. She said she wanted it to be one person and one person only. If she had a child, she said she would name him Rodney. The officer asked her, "Are you ready to become a mother?" And she replied, "Oh God, no. That's why I haven't had sex yet. That's why I don't want a boyfriend." The lies just ravel and ravel, eh? McDonald asked Katrina if she had put on any weight. She said she gained 5 pounds during Christmas but took off the weight by playing sports. She had played rugby on a women's team recently. Knowing the baby had been found choked to death with thong underwear, McDonald asked Katrina about her underwear. She wore only black or white plain underwear. She said never anything like a thong. She said, "What do I need them to be fancy for? I don't have sex." Katrina said she had been hearing lots of rumors about the homicide, such as the baby coming from a young girl or someone on crack cocaine. She had seen a strange vehicle in her neighborhood and 2 people, a man and a woman, out walking. McDonald asked Katrina what kind of person would murder a baby. She said someone that needs help, someone with problems, either a drug problem or alcohol problem or family problems or relationship problems. I don't know. Katrina allowed police to search her underwear drawer. She also gave them a DNA sample. However, before she was giving this, she actually started to confess. You see, on the morning of April 27th, 13 days after the killing, she approached her father, Kim. He was watching TV. She said, the baby might be mine." At once, he called the police. When 2 officers arrived, they found Katrina and her dad crying hysterically in the kitchen. When police interviewed her, Katrina now had a new story. She said she had dated a man named Dan who got her pregnant. When she went into labor, she called Dan. He drove to meet her, and she gave birth in Dan's car in the parking lot. She told the police Dan dropped her off at home and promised to take the baby to the hospital. And once she told this story, the police arrested her. After she was checked by a doctor, the police officer McDonald again interviewed her and she gave more details, claiming that later in the morning, several hours after she had given birth and left the baby with Dan, he called her to say he had dropped the child at the hospital. Can you believe that? She has random sex with a guy called Dan, she gets pregnant, she has the baby, she murders the baby. All of a sudden, Dan's got people knocking on his door. "Hey, did you kill this baby?" All while she's telling the police, "Well, Dan took the baby, I don't know what he did." What the hell? After the baby's body was found, however, both Dan and his friends called to threaten her if she ratted to the police. This is what Katrina claimed. He told her to get rid of it, allegedly. "He just told me that he didn't take the baby to the hospital." Katrina claimed she had no doubts that Dan was the father. She had told him about her pregnancy over the phone in October, saying she planned to give up the baby for adoption. Now, the police officer pushed Katrina on the issue of underwear that night, reminding the girl her DNA would be on her clothing, such as her thong and underwear. She said, "DNA doesn't lie. Is there any reason that we'll find your DNA on these items?" Katrina said, "Well, they shouldn't be." Katrina could provide no motive to the police for Dan killing the child. McDonald told her that the police weren't buying her story, that it made more sense that something happened to the baby when it was with her, and that she herself had put the baby over the fence. "No, I didn't put it there," Katrina insisted. "I didn't even know until Monday about it." At that point, Katrina was shown a picture of the thong underwear and told that it caused the death. The interview left Katrina with a new fear, that the police might find her DNA on her thong underwear. She was thinking, how do I explain this? So the following morning, on April the 28th, she was ready with another version of events. She told McDonald that she gave birth at home. She said, "I was scared and I didn't want my parents to know because my mom wanted to get an abortion when she found out I was pregnant. At first, the baby was fine. I held him and I was cuddling. She cut the umbilical cord with scissors. She was going to go upstairs and tell her mum, but held the baby too tight and he stopped breathing. She got scared and she dropped the baby, and she was too scared to go to the hospital. Then made it look like she murdered him. What? She was too afraid to tell her mother, or she was on the way to tell her mother. She accidentally squeezed and dropped the baby, and then she wanted it to look like murder? Her lies, or her version of events, are just, well, they're comical, really. She then claimed that after she dropped the baby and made it look like she murdered him, she was gonna go to the hospital but couldn't gather herself. So she put him in her neighbor's yard until she could figure out what to do. McDonald asked if Katrina did anything to the baby before she took him outside. She said, I put my underwear around his neck because she wanted it to look like a murder, because she felt like she had murdered him, adding that the baby wasn't breathing when she put the thong around the neck. McDonald asked what was going through your mind, to which Katrina said, that I took my baby's life, that I could give him a chance to live, because I should have went to the hospital that night. McDonald then asked her, okay, who's the father? To which Katrina said, I don't know. More questions from McDonald revealed that Katrina had narrowed it down to one of 4 guys. Katrina knew the last name of only one of them. She didn't know Dan's last name. McDonald congratulated Katrina for at last telling the truth. But there was still a problem with Katrina's story. The fact that the thong had been wrapped so tightly around the child's neck. A short time later, police interviewed her once more. This time the police brought in a homicide specialist, Dan McCullum of Calgary Major Crimes. McCullum was more confrontational. He said, there is no doubt in my mind that you are responsible for killing the baby. And you know and I know how that baby's life was gone. McCullum said he was concerned about one thing, that she never expressed remorse. He asked her, are you sorry for what happened? To which Katrina said, more than anything. McCullum then asked Katrina why she had never talked to someone about being pregnant. She said she was scared. And he asked her, what are you afraid of? And she said, disappointing my family and not being ready to be a mum, and my baby not finding a decent home for it to be in. McCullum told Katrina he actually spoke to Dan and then chastised Katrina, saying he had gone to arrest the young man. He said, you sent us on a little bit of a goose chase based on what you told us. He could have been arrested and charged for murder. He told Katrina that he believed the crime wasn't planned, that it was done in the spur of the moment, that she panicked because her parents might find out that she took her baby's life. She said, I was sorry. And then I tossed him over and I looked at him through the fence for about 20 minutes. And then I went into the house. I was feeling really bad. And I was feeling like I did something that I know I did was wrong, and I wanted to take it back. So, in May 2005, Katrina was sent to Alberta Hospital for a psychiatric examination. She was put under the care of psychiatrist Dr. Vijay Singh and a team of nurses, social workers and psychologists. In his talks with Katrina, she painted a bleak picture of her relations with her unnamed boyfriend. When a home pregnancy test was positive, she said she spoke to her boyfriend but painted him as a jerk. He was the one who pressured me into having sex with him. He was the one who abused me. I feel quite hurt and betrayed. He always told me he loved me. And when it came to the homicide, Katrina told another tale. This time, that she placed a towel over the baby's mouth to stop him from crying, then fell asleep. She woke up in the morning and he was dead. In this report on Katrina, Dr. Singh concluded she was not suffering from any mental disorders. He wrote she had been in affective denial about her pregnancy, meaning she knew she was pregnant but had none of the accompanying emotional and behavioral changes of pregnancy. Dr. Singh found that Katrina had many of the traits of the typical infanticidal mother. She was immature, emotionally isolated from the father, the baby's father, unlikely to be able to support her baby financially, carried the baby in secret, and received no prenatal care and gave birth alone. When Katrina gave birth, Dr. Singh concluded she took the baby's life because of disturbed mind. Katrina was released from Alberta Hospital and went home to work and await her trial dates. In the spring of 2006, her defense lawyer hired a psychologist, Dr. Mark Neska, to determine Katrina's state of mind. In his report, Neska wrote, her experience of childbirth included intense fear and pain. She felt helpless, experienced the process of giving birth as dreamlike, and is unable to recall portions of the birthing process. Subsequent to the birth of her baby, Katrina felt dazed and oddly detached from her environment. It was in this state, suffering from acute stress disorder, a major mental breakdown, that she had taken the child's life. But in the end, Dr. Nesker and Dr. Singh did not agree on Katrina's precise mental state, but did agree that she was disturbed when she took Rodney's life. If their testimony was accepted by the jury, Katrina would avoid a murder or manslaughter conviction, but would be convicted of the lesser charge of infanticide. In both trials, the Crown prosecutors hammered away at Dr. Singh's and Dr. Nesker's similar points, namely that both relied on Katrina's version of events to base their decisions. So if she was lying to them, their decisions were worthless. The prosecutors also drew attention to the issue of Nesker and Singh's disagreeing about Katrina's precise state of mind. Either way, in 2009, Katrina was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life with no parole for 10 years. She then appealed this verdict. During her appeal of her first conviction, the prosecutor suggested that it was Katrina's web of lies and her attempts to manipulate others that led to her arrest and conviction. Her lies to her family, her lies to her friends, her lies to investigators, and even her lies to experts assessing her mental state, because the fundamental flaw with the offense of infanticide led to her eventual downfall. But her appeals were successful, and she was handed down a 3-year suspended sentence. People paintball the Katrina's house, and their vehicle had been egged at traffic lights. Marlene had to twice call the police to the beauty salon to get rid of angry people. But another of Katrina's old acquaintances felt the court decision was right. They said they think she got the right sentence. The baby's alleged father, Dan, was least forgiving. In an interview, he said he was disgusted by Katrina's accusations of abuse against him. He said it's not true. There's no proof of anything. Dan doesn't believe the child was his, but thinks Katrina should pay for murder. He said, I think she should go to jail forever. The kid did not have a chance. I agree with him. How dare you give birth, put a thong around his neck, right? Strangle him to death, yeah? And then chuck him away like he's a piece of meat. 3-year suspended sentence? Nah, I'm not having it. Comment, tell me what you think.